There's a mic right here.
Good evening. It being 6:30, I'm going to call the Board of Selectmen meeting for Monday, October 3rd, 2022. I apologize for my voice. I'm not feeling well. At 6:30 to order. The purpose of this meeting is a public hearing. I will read the public hearing notice, and then we will hear from John Stefanini and the Great Meadowbrook Farm components. So pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 128A, Section 13A, the Town of Hardwick, 2022 at 6:30 at the Hardwick Elementary School, 76 Schoolhouse Road, Hardwick, Mass. 01037, to discuss whether to approve the location of Commonwealth, Equestrian, and Agricultural Center LLC's proposed horse racing operation at 228 Barre Road. Anyone wishing to be heard should appear at the time and place designated above. Public hearing is open. I am going to turn the meeting over to Ryan, our moderator. Ryan will moderate the discussion, has a set of rules that we're asking that you follow. Sorry, I probably should hold it closer to my mouth too. You're welcome, and sorry. So with that being said, the public hearing is open. The board will be recessing the public hearing no later than 8 p.m. What that means is we are done here tonight by 8 p.m. Ryan will keep the meeting moving and allow John and the group to do their presentation, and then there'll be Q&A. So Ryan.
Thank you, Chairwoman Quink. It's basically going to be like town meeting, but it's one bite of the apple. We'll put the microphone up over here. You'll have 60 seconds to state your case, your comments, or your question. And at that point, we'll recognize all of those that wish to speak. But it's based upon the constraints and the number of people. It's only one question. I would ask that you just turn your cell phones on silent or off. If you need to leave, obviously you can. Just for the record, exits from the back over here, and also to the left, and of course right here. We're going to shut the lights off during the presentation. It's approximately 15 to 20 minutes, and then John will throw it back to me and I'll set everything up. Please be courteous, please be respectful, and take it from there. So John, are you ready?
Good evening. My name is John Stefanini, and I've worked with this group for more than a decade. We're here this evening to introduce our team, our proposal, and the process ahead, and to answer any and all questions that you may have. And we hope this is the beginning of a discussion and a dialogue. As you may know, we are proposing to breed, train, and race thoroughbred horses on the 359-acre APR restricted site known as Great Meadowbrook Farm. We have entered into a purchase and sales agreement with Zen Acres, which gives us time to go through the permitting process and have these kinds of discussions. So we look forward to the conversation this evening. With us this evening, we have the members of our team. We're going to each say a few words about different pieces of this, and then we will close and answer your questions. First up is Richard Fields.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody. On behalf of my partner Rob and our lead architect, I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here and address our vision for Great Meadowbrook. I'd like to tell you something about myself first, and get a sense of the principle behind this project. I grew up in a very urban setting in the Bronx, in New York City, in a situation where there was no farms, no trees, no grass, but I always grew up with a real affinity to some strength to farming and ranching and everything that was countered where I came from. And when I was at a point in my life where I had a little bit of success. When I was much younger, I did what none of my friends could ever believe. Instead of getting a fancy car, I went out and bought a dairy farm. And I probably, that was probably one of, greatest moments of my life. My daughter, who at that point was a young girl, was 5 years old. She called me last night, and she's 35 years old now, and said to me that she's been following this project and has said that, if this project is approved in Hardwick and it goes forward, that she and her husband would like to move here and be part of it. So you could tell that it had this lasting impression on her, and it's been that way in our entire family. When later on in my career, when I was able to afford a little bit more, we went out and invested, and I became a Wyoming resident, and I've been involved in the breeding of horses, the training of horses, competing in rodeos, and all of that kind of stuff that comes with being out west. I have this commitment to open spaces and a commitment to farming and ranching. I'm the member of the board of farming, and one of the things we did in Wyoming that I'd like to be able to initiate here at Great Meadowbrook in Hardwick is that Willie came out and did a concert. We raised money for a project called Ag in the Classroom. And you would think that in a place like Wyoming, where the cows outnumber the permanent residents 3 to 1, truthfully, 500,000 residents, 1,000,005 ranches of cows, that you wouldn't have a problem trying to get the children back interested in farming and ranching. But it was an issue. And this project called Ag in the Classroom was very successful. It's one of the things that we would like to be able to do here at Great Meadowbrook in conjunction with some of your local schools if the project is approved to move forward. So I look at this as a project that has 3 silos. One is obviously the ongoing farming operation at Great Meadow and maybe being able to expand it into an educational program. The other is a breeding and training opportunity that Robin is going to speak to in a few minutes. And then, of course, part of that is the offshoot of that is that these equine athletes, they get to race. And there will be, we are proposing to build a grass track on Great Meadow up on the upper church, and there would be probably, we're anticipating, for example, if we were approved on time, is that we would have our first weekend race next September. And we're looking at never operating more than 6 weekends a year, most likely because of the lack of horses now in the United States. You're probably looking at the most 3 weekends a year. But I would say that for the first 2 years, most likely it is probably 1 or 2 weekends for the actual racing. The other thing I'd like to mention is that all of this is part of the ability, because of the Commonwealth has recently passed legislation allowing for sports betting. And mobile sports betting is now in almost every state in the United States, and it's become, it is actually the most successful kind of betting around. And so what will happen now here is, and I think at some point when we get into Q&A, John is going to get into this further, is that this mobile ability for wagering is will allow the town of Hardwick to generate almost $500 million a year. About it. Sorry? What did I say? 500 million? When I was in school, I was focused on everything but math. But it would generate $500,000 a year and direct payments off of the simulcast revenue and our increased tax rates. So I would like to turn this over to Robin, who will talk briefly about the breeding and training, and then Gregory is going to give you an overview of what our plans are, and then we're here to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
No. They keep calling people. Oh, they are? No, they don't. They shouldn't be doing that.
Hi, everyone.
No, because
Just to give you a little background,
this
this
is
is
I'm
Robin
going to.
Elijah.
Hold on, I got it.
Testing.
How's that?
Better? Testing, okay? Right. Hi, my name is Robin Kalayjian. I want to give you a little bit about my background. I've been a horse lover since I can remember and been riding horses since my early years. Professionally, I've been a nurse at Boston Teaching Hospital for many decades.
Robin,
Yes.
you gotta hold it. You
Hold
gotta
it up higher?
Yeah, no, put it under your chin.
Under my chin. Hello?
Now go up a little bit. That's where you're gonna have to hold it. So
Okay. I'll do my best. I met my husband in the late 70s through riding, actually. And, through our riding, we got introduced to the thoroughbred racehorse. And could not help but appreciate their athleticism, their work ethic, their engaging personalities, and their beauty. And we decided that we would like to build a horse farm for ourselves and breed horses for racing. And that took about 10 years for us to put enough together to do that. And in 1987, we had our first foal arrive. Very exciting. Since that time, we've been breeding our mares for many years, and we actually introduced a stallion for breeding in Massachusetts, and we bred to him for many years until he retired. So I guess I want to say we've really experienced, well, I've experienced the whole range of thoroughbreds from breeding to retirement. Currently, I have 2 brood mares myself who are retired and are with us. Because there are no stallions standing currently in Massachusetts, we send our brood mares to out of state, to New York right now, where they get bred. Then they would come back to us, and then we send them back to New York to foal out and be bred. It's certainly not the ideal situation for if you want to have a breeding farm. Your mares are not on your farm for a big portion of that time. Can't hear me. So it is our dream to hopefully bring that.
Can't hear you back here.
Okay. We hope to bring a breeding program back to Massachusetts so that we can not have to undergo shipping our horses in and out of the state to do that. So the idea is to have a premier breeding program. And this would help the breeding owners and trainers, but also the other ancillaries that benefit by having horses being bred and raced in Massachusetts, such as hay and farming, veterinary, feeds, farriers, etc. So, and one thing I want to also add is that after racing, many of these thoroughbreds go on to do, because they're such athletes, they are able to go on to other sports and provide enjoyment for people outside of the racing community. In fact, at the over-the-wall event that you had here, many of the horses that competed in that event were actually off-the-track thoroughbreds. In addition, there are horses, thoroughbreds off the track can be retrained for other sports, but there are some that
can't really go through retraining and rehab. And for those who want to offer a retirement home, I'm very, very passionate about providing a haven for horses once they've finished their career racing and can't go on to others. So we're hoping that this land is also part of the program. Hardwick is a beautiful, bucolic town, and I envision it being the perfect setting for breeding horses and training horses and a retirement place. I hope you will think it fits into your town as well.
Thanks, Robin. My name is Gregory Haas. I am a principal at David Schwartz Architects, and I have been working with this group for several months looking at this project. I also have a connection to some degree with rural communities. I grew up in western Iowa, and my father was a farmer of 160 acres there. So I do appreciate the character and the distinctiveness of communities like Hardwick. That being said, that brings me to the concept that you see up here on the in the drawing. And again, this is a concept today we're showing you. There's a lot of details that will need to be worked out over time, but this gives you a broad indication of it as to what we're thinking at the moment. First and foremost, again, you can see that the bucolic setting that Robin mentioned is something that we are endeavoring to preserve and to maintain and to enhance on the site. We understand that we're proposing a development that's on APR land, and we appreciate the real beauty and uniqueness of this piece of property. So it's something we've spent a lot of time and attention making sure that we have understood. So what you see here is our proposal for the 340 some days when there's not a festival on the site. And this really centers around a number of pieces. The first is the breeding program. So on the lower left of the drawing there, you see one of the breeding barns, which is we're proposing gets built right to the north of Barre Road. And there'll be two barns there that we built, one to house the mares and one to house the stallions, and several pastures that go along with that. The second component of building that we're proposing is on Upper Church Street, which would be across from the track. You see the outline of the track there, which is in the existing meadow there. The track, again, would be a grass track. So on the day-to-day basis, you really are not going to notice that much difference between what's there and when the track is installed. The one building we're proposing there, of course, if you all agree to this, would be a community pavilion, which would allow us to have some horse activities that would be covered. We could do horse showing of horses. We could sell horses. We could use it for a farmer's market. You could also use it for educational programs for 4-H and other sorts of community events. That's there on Upper Church Street. Further down at the bottom of the page, you see the existing dairy farm. That is proposed to be reused for some of these horse uses that Robin was talking about, the rehabilitation and the therapy. And we're proposing to build an additional outdoor riding ring that would be covered there. So from day to day, you can see here that generally the site is going to look as it does today, with a couple of additional buildings that are pulled off of that don't exist on Upper Church Street. Next slide, please. Now we're zooming in to show you a plan of the festival days, and this is Upper Church Street. North is to the right on this plan, and there you can see the pavilion at the top up there by close to the Ruggles Rock. So what we're proposing is that we're taking very strong cues from the event that took place in the 2000s, the Over the Walls event, in which Upper Church Street was closed. We understand that is something that we would need permission from you all to do. But the notion here was that we would bring in all temporary facilities for the festival day. So the elements that you see there are a series of grandstands and tents and food trucks that would allow us to do all of the things that we would want to do during festival days. That would come in at the beginning of the weekend. At the end of the weekend, that would all be carted up and taken away, so that at the end of the weekend, it would go back to looking just as it does today. The stone walls would remain, trees along Upper Church Street would all remain, and you'd have the meadows back roughly the way that they are today. Next slide, please. And here you see that same view during a festival day. And you can see the event is basically taking place on the Upper Church Street right away there. Next slide. We wanted to include this because this is a photo from one of the over the wall events that took place on Upper Church Street in this, I think it was around 2003. So it would be very similar in terms of number of people and the way that the roadway got set up for the festival events. Next slide, please. And then finally, we want to talk a little bit about some associated projects that could happen. Should you all agree that this is a project that you'd like here, we think there's a couple of associated be beneficial to the community. One being a small country inn that would allow people who might come for either breeding business and to spend some time here at Hardwick. And then a farm-to-table restaurant, which would also allow local producers to share some of their interesting harvests with a larger group of people. So things like, meats, cheeses, produce, and even maybe local wines and beers could be presented here and shared with a larger community. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to John.
Thank you. Turn the lights on and show a couple of comments before we get into a couple of things that have come up during the community conversation that I'm sure there are questions about that I just thought I would just mention up front. The first is our estimate of $500,000 a year in new annual revenue to Hardwick is unrestricted. Hardwick can use that however they choose to use that. Whatever costs are associated with these events, police details, fire details, water, sewer, cleanup, we would pay for all of those costs ourselves. So those revenues are not as mitigation. Those are revenues for the community to use today. By comparison, Great Meadowbrook Farm today produces about $10,000 in tax bills to the community. So it's a significant increase. Second is, there is the sports betting that Richard talked about on mobile applications that does not occur here, and it will not occur here. This is not a casino. Casino gambling is strictly prohibited by state law, strictly prohibited by the land use, and strictly prohibited by your bylaws. That is not part of this conversation. So if someone tells you it is, that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about putting in 2 barns in a pavilion and racing next year 2 days. With that, I will turn it back to Ryan, and we'd love to answer any and all questions you have.
Testing. So just a reminder, if you want to speak, raise your hands, go up to the microphone, 60 seconds, and then find out who, if you have somebody specific that you want directed to, they'll in turn respond. So, Judy, go ahead.
My name is Judith Combs. I live in the west part of Hardwick, which is equally as beautiful. I'm concerned about the health effects of your venture and the traffic it may generate. I'm concerned of the loss of our common wealth and peacefulness and the potential that this represents in raising food for humanity and combining concepts of planetary health that are coming along, rather than providing something for a specialized interest.
Sure, you've got 10 seconds to wrap it up.
Okay. And I don't know how you're going to generate $500,000. The biggest thing is we don't want to lose control locally. If it is approved to have a raceway, then I believe the state takes over.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Judy. You asked a whole bunch of questions. I'll try to answer as many as I can, and then hopefully we'll get to the rest of them as we move along. First, the revenue is generated from wagering that occurs here. It's generated by an increased payment in taxes, a payment in lieu of taxes to the community. In terms of the community and open space, one of the things we didn't talk about is there's a lot of concern about development and the closing of open spaces. We're not talking about closing any open spaces other than to put in the 2 barns we're talking about sustaining them. But Professor Mullen at UMass did a study in 2016 with his colleagues, and it talked about the impact of a breeding operation on open spaces and farms, not just in Hardwick, but all across the Commonwealth. Because, as Robin was talking about, a breeding facility here has the ability to support open spaces and farms in this community through the production of hay and other materials, and through sending broodmares back to farms in other places in the Commonwealth. The issue of health and traffic, we would conduct a fulsome traffic study as part of our project. We would generate and prepare on an annual basis a parking plan and a traffic mitigation plan where we would hire people and we would direct traffic. We do not expect our traffic and our customers to be a lot different than the fair, the over-the-wall festivities, the events at the winery. We're looking at 3,000 to 5,000 people that would come in over a weekend that would participate. A lot of them horse enthusiasts, breeders, farmers from other places in the Commonwealth. I hope that begins to answer your question.
Thank you, John. Okay, who else would like to? Ma'am, please come up and be sure to state your name so everybody knows who you are.
Thank you very much. Meg Hyde, and I live at Cherry Hill Road in Hardwick. Thank you for your information. I'd really like to speak to our county officials and to all of us here about this project. It's got the potential for significant change in our community life. So I think we'd all agree the responsible thing would be to conduct a really thorough cost-benefit analysis of this project, and to do that before any actions are taken that start committing the town to moving along this path. We would like to know if what we've been hearing about the location vote that when a town one time approves a physical site for racing in Massachusetts, that approval is a permanent approval. I'm not a lawyer, but I would hope we've gotten our own legal counsel and legal counsel who is experienced in understanding state intent and the rules and regulations regarding racing.
Okay, Meg, thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Alex Whiteside from KP Hall, Town Council. To address the question in terms of the action that
the Board of Selectmen will be taking and voting to approve the location. That's just the first step in the process. So before the applicants can apply to the State Gaming Commission for a license that will be required for the online betting aspect of the operation, this is just the first part in that process. There also will need to be some review, I believe, by the planning board in town. So there are definitely multiple prongs to the permitting that's going to go into this operation.
Thank you.
And I would just add to that, in addition to that, there is an APR review piece of this process that occurs. There's an annual review and license that goes to the State Racing Commission. And there's an annual review which is part of the host community agreement, which is part of this. Each of those things have binding restrictions on us, the applicant, and limit what we can and cannot do. And so think about this in terms of a license that the community gives out for anything else, common victualler or an alcohol license. Yes, you renew it each year, but you have to follow the strict guidelines that exist there. And if you don't follow the guidelines, you don't keep your license. This is a heavily, heavily regulated activity in terms of the safety of the animals and every other piece of this that goes on. This is not you make one decision and you never hear from anybody ever again. There'll be more conversation on this on an annual basis than there are for most of the other licenses this community gives out. Thank you, John. Yes, ma'am.
And again, just remind everybody, we're trying to get everybody to the opportunity, 60 seconds. So if I interrupt, it's just for fairness, okay?
Good evening. My name is Lisa Cohen. I live in Gilbertville. My name is Lisa Cohen. I live in Gilbertville. My question is, since almost all of the income is predicated on getting a gambling license, and you don't have that in hand, what happens to the plan if that doesn't come through? Because that's the Commonwealth needs to give that. What's your plan B? If Hardwick proves this and you start your process, I don't see you being able to have a going concern with just golf courses racing.
So thank you, Lisa, for the question. That's a good question. They're all tied together with each other. The racing component of the license, which we submitted our application last week, a copy has been posted on the municipal website for everyone to review and to look at. If you have questions, we welcome them, and please email or call us. They're tied together, but if you get a 128A license, which is what is a race meet license, we apply next year to race on September 10 and September 11, those 2 days. If we get that, it comes with what they call a 128C license, which is the right to simulcast. So they go hand in hand with each other. If we end up doing one, we end up doing the other because they go together with each other. So it's not, you should think of them as coming in tandem with each other. And under Section 4, I believe, is of 128C, the community gets 1.5% of that revenue. And almost all of that, overwhelming lion's share that is occurring, not even in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it's occurring all over the country where people are voting on their tablet or phone or something else. The wagering that occurs on site will occur in a temporary tent 2 days next year. 2. And that's for someone who approaches the site and would like to wager on site. Other than that, there is no wagering occurring by law or otherwise in Hardwick. None. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, everybody. I just recently purchased a beautiful property in town, so I'm a new resident. I have a question for each.
Can you please announce your name to everybody?
Sorry, my name is Michelle Arnold. Like I said, I just bought a property in the area. I have a question for each side. One, the revenue that comes in from the site, where is that money going to be allocated? Schools, roads, the such. And on the other side, for the health and welfare of the animals, does that open up programs for the local trade schools and veterinary schools to help train them for our future? And would there be volunteer activities for the community?
Thank you, Michelle. So I'd like to.
So I can talk on behalf of the town. If you all hear me, I'm really trying to keep my voice. So we won't really know that until, this happens. It isn't a day one and the money's going to be there. Very similar to every budget year that we've had. And you've seen us all sitting up here talking about the financial situation of the town. It really will depend on what needs are there. I mean, the hope would be that money's used for big things, capital things that we shouldn't really put into the budget process. If you sort of think back, and I hate to even say this word, but if you think about the landfill and what the landfill funds were used when we had them, they were used for capital items and big things. So ideally, this probably happened long before I'm still in office, or hopefully I'll still be in town. That it would be used for things that the town really needs and not to be part of the normal budgeting. That's my opinion. Of course, there's 2 other selectmen and a bunch of finance committee members and all the residents that really decide how it's used, but that would be the hope. Do you guys want to add anything?
I do.
Do you, Kelly or Rob, you want to add?
No, I think you said it perfectly.
So I'd like to add two thoughts to that. First of all, on the money end of it, I'd like to say the following, that the projected numbers that John is talking about, which is $500 million. I know, I'm waiting for you to say it. Well, this will be ongoing forever. The $500,000 a year, we would be prepared to guarantee that number as a minimum, so that from a planning standpoint, you could say, well, we know that, as John says, when you get the racing license, you automatically get a simulcast license. They come hand in hand. You can then, as a jurisdiction, start planning for this money on a regular basis, on an annual basis, because it goes in perpetuity. We will guarantee that as a minimum number as we start negotiating the host agreement. The second thing I'd like to address is your question about, I'm going to call it apprentices and tying it with the schools. I probably didn't spend enough time on that, but that is something that is really important to me. We've done this in Wyoming, where we did basically an apprentice program. We would like to use the actual farm as well as when we build let's just call it farm to table restaurant, as an ability to train young people in those crafts. I've done it in the past. You can train people for all sorts of jobs in the agricultural world, and you can certainly train them, in the culinary. So I would like to be able to be in a situation where we work in conjunction with your local trade schools and especially your agricultural schools. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Jackie Clee. I live in Hardwick, and I live off the common, so relatively close where this is going to be happening. And so I have a few more questions that I'd like for clarification, specifically on development of the site. So I read the article in Thoroughbred Racing about how, yes, your first goal would be to have a race next year, but then plans would to be have up to maybe 6 weekend races or up to 20 events a year. So I had questions on one, what are your plans for parking? Is a parking lot part of your 350 acres? How many capacity would that hold? Or are there going to be people parking all around the common and up and down all the side streets, like every weekend event? That's one of my questions. The other is workers. How many permanent workers? How many transient workers do you plan on having eventually with this farm? Do you plan on building housing for the permanent or transient workers, like your backstretch workers and your racing
So those are the main things I was wondering, because that brings a lot of different aspects into it as well.
Jackie, for questions. First parking. We're committed to having a requirement in the host community agreement that requires us as a condition of license on an annual basis to meet with the select board and to have a parking plan that is approved by them. We would air to have no parking on streets to minimize any congestion or disruption. We would probably end up with satellite parking with shuttle buses for people who are working or for people that are part of the event. And we're looking at a parcel adjacent to it, which is not APR restricted, for parking of patrons, customers, people who come and want to see and be part of the festival for the day. In terms of the number of days, we're looking at no more than 6 weekends, but as Richard talked about earlier, it's unrealistic in our future, at least for the next 5 years, to expect that we're going to be able to do more than a couple of weekends because of the number of horses and the size of the purse pool to pay those horses. But we would guarantee we wouldn't do more than 6 weekends. The 20 days it doesn't exactly match up, I know. A couple of them would end up being long weekends if we ended up getting to that point. But we don't anticipate that at the moment. Workers, we're looking at a permanent workforce of 25 to 50 people, a temporary workforce in excess of 100 people. It'll take a lot of people to paid volunteers to usher and direct traffic and to provide jobs as part of these events that will occur on site. We are looking at a couple of properties that are currently abandoned as a possibility for some housing for people that would end up being the stable manager or something else associated. There is some housing on the site itself, which is currently being utilized, but we would need something for that core group of people. Does that answer your question?
The gentleman in the white, do you still have a question? It's on the bleachers.
Yes, come on.
My name is Eric Dixon. My day job, I'm a physician over at UMass Memorial. And I spend just about every other waking hour taking care of horses. Taking care of horses at horse rescues and supporting the horse rescues or taking care of my own. The problem we have with the race industry is that, yes, they have breeding programs and they have racing programs, but there's nothing to take care of the horses at. And I've seen over and over again, and have some of those horses at my house that are just abandoned by this. What you've described in this project is an ecosystem that supports education with the horses, that also supports an afterlife, and puts a very reasonable program together, which I think is sustainable. I wish every horse program in the country, or horse racing program in the country, did what you're describing here. And I just want to hear from you personally that you're going to either support one of the local rescues, the State Equine Rescue over in Ocamp, would be the closest, or develop the rescue here as part of your project.
Thank you very much. I think it's a great question. I would say to you that we would do both. I know that Robin's passion is really the rescue and rehab of retired equine athletes. That's number one. So you can guarantee that they would be actually rescued and rehabbed on the property. But we would also dedicate some of the funds. And the horsemen, by the way, on their own had a meeting on Saturday where they decided that there would be a portion of the purse pools put aside for rescue and rehab of thoroughbreds. So I appreciate your question, and you're right on. So thank you very much. John would like to
Paul Morello. Umbrella. Come on.
Can everybody hear me okay? My name is Paul Umbrello. I'm actually the executive director for New England Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association. And those are important words you guys need to understand tonight. I also serve on the Mass Thoroughbred Breeders Board as a director. My job, and I keep awake every night, is that as part of what these guys are trying to do here today, is I have to support hundreds of local horsemen with benevolence, old age assistance, life insurance, and many other benefits that our organization as a nonprofit supports. And I think it's important to understand that us as the horsemen, now remember, we're attached at the hip, but theoretically these gentlemen can't race without our consent. We get into those contract negotiations. And one of the things that's important to myself, and I think it's important to all of you, is that, and I heard the questions asked, is we the horsemen, through this program we're trying to do, can contribute proceeds from our revenue streams, percentages that will go towards thoroughbred aftercare. And something I thought of on the way up, because I keep hearing about revenue, we can contribute a percentage to a community mitigation fund through our proceeds. So we have the ability as horsemen, not the investors, to give up those type of proceeds to help what you people are specifically looking for. Our organization, specifically myself, rescues about 6 horses every year that you talk about that might be someone just can't take care of. So that, again, it's not just about us running around a race course and for 6 weekends and running for purses. It's about the breeding farms that we're trying to preserve, the open space we're trying to preserve, and all those other jobs that, whether it's on this site or throughout the Commonwealth, and I know I put it in there, and it's APR land, but I read an article the other day, and I'm going to say it again, that to me it was shocking to hear that the USDA reported in 2007 to 17, 16,000 acres was consumed, not necessarily APR, doesn't mean it can't down the road, but farming consumed for development. I ran the numbers on the way up in my head. That's Great Meadowbrook Farm being consumed in about 3 months, or 50 equivalents of Great Meadowbrook Farm. So I'm going to emphasize today, because it's really kind of from the horsemen, is 3 days, 6 days, those weekends mean so much to us that the revenue streams coming in that we get, how much more I can give back to both the breeders, the horsemen, and this community. So I think it's important for you all to understand that and hear that. Thank you. And I'll field any questions at the end. Yes, awesome.
Neil Dawson, live just a few houses down from the farm. And first I'd like to point out, I noticed that you equated the Hardwick Fair with what you're doing. You should. The Hardwick Fair is just 36-hour volunteer run event that's been going on here for 200 plus years. Proudly never makes money. And that's not what this is. So, but my question is, so you guys are kind of skated between 2 days and 6 weeks of 6 long weekends of events. So, you know, that's a big difference. And that means a lot to people in town because it's going to be a traffic problem. There's no way around that. It's going to change the center of town. And it will be irreversible. So I think it's fair that the town that you would commit before we had to agree to this. What's it going to be? How many events are there going to be each year? Not next year, just while you're getting started. But what's your goal? Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Dawson. First, the comparison was not meant to compare the not-for-profit with the for-profit activities, just the cars and the visitors. Let me, if it doesn't bore people, be very candid about why 20 days is a number. Okay? The state legislature, in its wisdom, decides that there should be a goal of racing 20 days a year. And everyone involved acknowledges that's a very unrealistic goal. The commission has the ability to waive as many of those days as possible based on the inability of people to do that. Now, the gentleman who was just up here represents the horsemen, and they'd like to race as many days as he can. He and his group, without speaking for them, and our group, we don't see into the crystal ball, into the future as far as we can, but we can get more than a few weekends. That said, the state law says 20. So we can't stand and say, we're never going to try to achieve the legislative goal of 20 days. But I can stand here and tell you it is not an achievable goal. It's not achievable in purses. It's not achievable in terms of horses. What's realistic? Could we get to 3 weekends at the end of a decade? Maybe.
I was thinking as he was saying that, I was going to say an achievable goal is 3 weekends. However, what John was saying is this was a legislative decision. This was not our decision or the horseman's decision to say racing up to 20 days. So it is in the legislation, but realistically, probably for the next few years, there will be 2 weekends and then maybe eventually 3 weekends. There are just not enough horses. There's also not enough money in what is called the Thoroughbred Development Purse Pool that is funded through various mechanisms in the state. So when you really look at it, I think it's a great question. We weren't trying to skate through anything. It was just a fact, which is the legislation stated up to 20 days. From our standpoint, we actually asked for less than 10. So we're really looking at a situation where it is impossible to ever get to that number. So I would say a realistic goal would be, from our standpoint and from the community, in 3 or 4 years, you may have 3 weekends. That would be it.
Maybe. I hope that answers your question candidly and directly. And we would come back to the community each year as part of our host community agreement and work through a parking and traffic mitigation for the number of days that we apply for. It's an annual license. So we would go and ask for the number of days. This next year, we've asked for 2 days. And realistically, we probably would do the same the year after, or maybe 3 days. But you're not going to see a wild expansion. There just is not the money or the horses to be able to do that, irrespective of the legislative goal of achieving 20 days. Mr. Shedd.
Rich Shen, I live on Hardwick Road. Yeah, I'm a little confused because I read all the documents. I'm a little confused. I read all the documents again and again. It says 20 days. And it's 1 day a weekend. If you add that up, that's 5 months out of the year you'd be racing. That's a possibility. So my question is actually, if you race 2 days, how do you generate $500,000 for us? I don't understand.
So let me answer 2 parts of that question. First piece of your question is we're talking about 6 weekends or 20 days. So we're not talking about more than 6 weekends, period. And second, it's a standard that is in the state law that we this year asked to waive 18 of the 20 days. And it would realistically, we would end up doing that almost each and every year. So we're not looking at 50 weeks or 20 weeks. We're looking at most 6. We would do the off-peak times. And realistically, we're looking at 1 weekend next year. And in the next 5 years, maybe we get to 3 weekends. More realistically, we probably expand to 2 weekends. There just is not the horses or the folks to be able to do that. The revenue, Richard Fields is a great negotiator, Nicole. So, they will achieve $500,000. We've done that. 500 million, yes, exactly.
That's where I'm going.
So the money comes from that $500,000, which is a guarantee. Okay, so we'll write it in the agreement that we on a quarterly basis give to the community. Where we anticipate that money being allocated to is about $240,000 of it comes from simulcast revenue. That's people on their phones all across the country, New York, California, betting on horse races, or people in Massachusetts betting on races someplace else. Number two, it's associated with food and related taxes around the events themselves. And three, it is a pilot program. Currently, the property pays a little less than $10,000 a year in taxes. We would agree to a pilot program, a payment in lieu of taxes, of the difference, a couple $100,000 a year. So the answer is, it's real money to the community that's unencumbered that the community can use for whatever it wishes. As I said earlier, any expenses, police details, and the like, we will pay for all of that above and beyond that ourselves. Mr. Remichowski.
Sam Remichowski. I like the details, and I have a question on this discussion. It seems like you have the 128A license, is the 20 days, the festival kind of covering, but in your own document you submitted to the state, in section 8.2, you asked and you acknowledge you wanted to simulcast. That's the C 128C license, I think. Correct me anything I say is wrong. The state says in that document that you need to run 900 live races, a minimum of 100 race days, and a minimum of 7 races per day. Do you also say in that same document that you anticipate 2,000 people in grandstands, 3,000 people in the apron, 5,000 people per race day? So that would come to about 500,000 people in Hardwick in a year in the race season. Our population, that would be 250 times our town population in 1 year. So that would be 2.5 times our town population in 1 year. It seems unmanageable.
Thank you, I believe your math is probably correct, but your numbers are totally wrong. So let me unpack that and answer your question. The racing statute, chapter 128A and 128C, you're correct. We would apply for a simulcast license, which is 128C. The language that is in the statute today, which dates back to 1935, has some really ridiculous number of races. If you read the fine print in that section, it says that that section of the statute sunsets this year. It goes away. And it gets replaced with 20 days. We could have an hour-long conversation about how they went from 900 to 100 to 50 to 20. They're still unrealistic numbers, but they're not 900. The other thing is that a race, the statute is very complicated. A race is one race. So on a race day, so let's say next year we're going to race on September 10 and 11, there will be between 6 and 10 races on those 2 days. So there will be between 12 and 20 races on 2 days. So it's not 5,000 people at an outer end per race. It's the festival. So you can't multiply every race by every person. Every person doesn't leave and come back every half hour for a race. The number of people you're talking about is not dissimilar to other events that have occurred in the community, which I won't mention by name. But it is something that we feel we can achieve through a parking management plan without being disruptive to emergency or other activities that are going on in the community. And they're not dissimilar to what you've seen. The events you're talking about, the numbers in the statute are admittedly confusing. But to be clear, and the clearest I can say this, is the legislature has changed the goal to 20 days. We believe, and experts in the area believe, that's an unrealistic goal. We've asked for 2. I hope that answers your question, sir. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Lagomasino.
Hello, my name is James Lagomasino. I live in charity of Hardwick. I'm not sure we got an answer as to whether once this location is approved by the town, that is a permanently accepted location for horse racing, whether this organization or any other organization comes in. That was my understanding.
Was that your question?
That was my one question, but because to clarify. Okay. But I've been looking at this thing for about a week, and I feel like I'm learning a lot just in a very short amount of time. I'm sure there's a lot I haven't learned. My feeling is that we're going to see a lot more than 2 weekends of racing in this town at some point in the not so distant future. And we know that this proposal has been offered to numerous other towns ever since Suffolk Downs closed down. And those towns, which are much larger than ours, 2 and 3 times the size of our town, have all rejected it. Some of them claiming because it would upset their rural community and the quiet peace that they enjoy there. To not think that that would happen in Hardwick, I think would be very, very misleading. And if you think about 2 communities that were adjacent to New Braintree, Petersham, I'll give you 10 to 1 odds they wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Can you respond to the question, or are we going to take it under advisement again and respond?
So let me answer.
Just for any questions that are mentioned tonight that we don't have concrete answers for, which is the question that you just posed, we will make sure, and I guess procedurally, any other questions that come up as a result of tonight that you'd like answers and you don't feel have been answered, please send them to Nicole and we will get answers. So we will follow up on that question and make sure we get a final answer on that with regard to the location.
And if I can just address the other part of Mr. Lagomasino's question, the other communities you're talking about, this group has only been involved in one other area. Be aware of other communities across the state that have looked at this in one way or another. There used to be 17 communities in the Commonwealth that did racing around agricultural fairs, county fairs, Northampton, Greenfield, South Weymouth, and they've gone by the wayside not because of anything other than the lack of availability of horses. There are no horses to race in those communities that exist. We looked at Sturbridge as a community on the intersection of 8420 and the Mass Pike. It was a very large commercial property, and it was a very large commercial development that was looked at for the site because it was what the community was looking at. It is nothing at all in comparison to this, and that was relative to the commercial component of that site. It was just too big for that community. It wasn't the open space and agricultural components that were the rejection of that proposal. It had to do with the fact that 84 and 90 are a parking lot most of the summer. Not relative to anything in this, but it's a major intersection.
I have 30 years, and I live up the Church Street since 40 years, but I'm still a stranger and foreigner, as you can hear. I would like to tell you that I kind of consider myself the janitor of up the Church Street. We walk it twice, 3 times a day, me, my dog, my wife, and we pick up the trash. Not much, I must say, because it's not heavily traffic compared to upper road. We pick up fallen down branches, and the stone wall in winter is a little bit wobbly, so those big boulders come down, so I rolled them towards the street. Picked them up with my tractor a little later, and kind of maintain it. But I have a feeling I know it as a little bit like my front yard. And when I do that, I see the wildlife to the left, to the right. On the western side, there's 6 mama bears in the trough between Hansen and Hardwick, and they all winter there. You don't go there without a sight in spring. Okay, I would like today we have, I don't know how many turkeys. There is moose on the right side, on the west side. My question is, when I look at your plans, you're going to set up 500 porta potties and stands on the east side of the road, and you're going to trample down all that grass, which is the wetlands anyway. Eric put a gully in there. How are you going to maintain AP conditions? That means what everybody tells me who I met there, and I meet a lot of people, they all say the same. It's pristine. Thank God for AP. Why can't you break those AP rules? Why don't we have anything to say? You take it away from us by putting up buildings and concession stands.
Any service on the street, even if it is with a sidearm protection. We're not, maybe I said something, maybe it isn't clear. We're talking about building 2 barns and a pavilion on this site, and we're talking about overcutting the grass to put in a grass track. We're not touching the view corridor. We're not touching the development. The over the walls program that we're on there for 4 or 5 years, the turkeys are still here, the bears are still here, the moose is still here, and we would, for those days, ask the community to close the road as they did in Over the Wall. And there's a picture that you can see behind me, which is slide number 8, which is the Over the Walls festivities. We're not talking about using the APR property to build or construct or to do anything other than to use it for agricultural purposes. We're talking about using the right of way for concessions and viewing and whatnot. And then when the event is done, it is gone, just as it was there. You don't see any of these things in this picture in your view in your daily walk today, yet they were there for an entire weekend. Horses prefer to run on grass, which is safer. They prefer to run on grass, which is safer. So a safer track is a grass track, according to the racing standards.
Thank you. All right, the gentleman in the hat here.
My name is John Trollia. I'm a new resident of Hardwick. I have a couple of questions.
John.
Sure. A couple of questions. It's my understanding that your contingent has met with the DAR, which has control over the regulations of the Agricultural Protection Act. And I'm wondering if you can talk about your meeting and your reception there and some of the concerns and issues that were raised. Because the first thing that has to happen is the APR regulations have to be met. Secondly, another question I have that I haven't heard an answer to is, how do you plan to limit the maximum attendance at your events? Is it going to be a gate, a fee entry, and once you reach the maximum seating capacity to cut it off? What if 10,000 people show up? Next question.
There you go. 10 seconds.
The regulation on the APR only protects the APR. That street has no overhead power lines, which is part of the natural beauty of it. It's a beautiful place to walk. You're not reminded that you're anywhere but possibly the south of England or beautiful Hardwick. Would you make a commitment not to put power poles or lines for telecommunication along that street? Thank you.
Question. The last one is the easiest one. We have no plans, no discussion of doing anything on Upper Church Street, no utilities, no power, no nothing. The reason that the site was selected for the Stallion Barn and the Broodmare Barn is there happens to be septic, water, and utilities at that site. So it minimizes any kind of utility work that needs to occur. You will see no difference on Upper Church Street, and that will be restricted to us in writing in the contract with the community and APR. We would need to file a letter with the Agricultural Land Preservation Committee for what we would need to do. We believe everything that we've outlined to you is 100% consistent with APR. We're talking about building a breeding barn on a breeding facility, a pavilion for agricultural purposes, and utilizing the property to breed, train, and race thoroughbreds. And if you read the statute, that's what the statute speaks to.
Hey, hello, Roger Raymond.
Sorry, go ahead.
Roger Raymond, I live on Upper Church Street. So I read an article about Mr. Fields, his dream, his tenacity to make his dream, and more so the story he led with today. So, and the millions that evaporated with Suffolk's downwind, however it went. Myself, Fred, and many others on the street are not born residents. We came here for our dreams. We spent them. We bought homes, we bought land, we renovated. Dr. Frick bought a house to tear down to maintain his view, to maintain his peace and quiet. What are you doing for that? That's my question. What about our dreams? Our dreams are happening. We spent our millions. Where are we? And you guys sit up here smirking, laughing, 500 million, 500,000. This isn't a money grab for us. This isn't a business. This is our home. This is what we raise our families. It's a hard dream. So when one of your attendees takes off down my street where I live, my children walk every day, and they take out my wife's car and keep on, they're done. It's okay. We got $500,000 and Rich got his dream.
So we don't talk about proposing. We take your question and answer it seriously. We believe that you have land that's protected by APR and open space. This property is going to be used for something. And we believe we have a responsible use for that property that minimizes the use of that property and keeps its pristine value.
Mr. Raymond, we're trying to get everybody in. They'll be here tomorrow night as well. And I'm sure you can talk to them afterwards. It's sirens. Hold on, Bill. I saw this first. So
Elizabeth Siren, I live on Barre Road, and I actually own horses. I'm going to speak to the ugly part of horse racing, and that's doping and slaughter. There's rules against both of those, but they're still doping horses. They're making homemade concoctions, and what's even worse is the jockeys. The jockeys are notorious for having cocaine, marijuana, and whatever else they come in and have. So that's just so that everybody knows that that is going to happen, and organized crime is going to happen. Let's talk to horse slaughter. 30,000 baby horses, thoroughbreds, are born every year. The thoroughbred racing industry culls 20,000 horses a year. They have documented 10,000 of those horses going to slaughter. And I know that you sat there and said, oh, no trainer will ever race again if they send the horse to slaughter. They sell it to somebody else and somebody else and somebody else, and they still go to slaughter. Okay? And it's an ugly, ugly fact of life. The horses going to slaughter. The horses that have gone to slaughter, daughters and sons and grandsons of Secretariat. Okay, and it's not a question, it's a comment, and they can speak to it afterwards, okay? There's not only that, is Alligator, which maybe people if you remember that horse's name, they said, oh, he broke his leg kicking a stall. No, somebody tied a rope to his leg and dragged him behind a pickup truck because they wanted the insurance money.
Thank you, Mrs. Siren.
Speak to.
All right, Mr. Coleman.
So, thank you for the question. It's one that this group and in Massachusetts has been taken extremely seriously, and Massachusetts has been a leader on it. There are good horse owners and there are bad horse owners. There are good dog owners and there are bad dog owners. The gentleman to my left, to your right, led Suffolk Downs when he became involved with an absolute zero tolerance anti-slaughter, anti-doping. And that meant chasing people through the ownership chains you're looking at. And when they found them, they were banned for life. It became such a story and pressure on the industry that the industry as a whole had to move towards it. The federal government has set up a new administration called HISA, the Horse Integrity Security Authority. They've set up new regulations in terms of horse safety, dealing with everything from medications to drugs, etc. This facility will strictly adhere to those regulations and likely exceed those, because that's the horse owners you have here. So yes, are there problems in the industry and do they do horrific, horrible things? Yes. Have the people in this room been leaders against that and driving the industry as a whole? Absolutely. Read about it. It's there. Continue to do so. These majestic equestrian athletes deserve more. That's why you heard the head of the Horse Association talk about them taking their dollars and putting them into a retirement program. That's why retirement and aftercare are such an important passion of Robbins and Richards in terms of how to do this. This is a problem in the industry. Massachusetts has been a leader and will continue to be a leader in this area. Mr. Paul.
Thanks, I'm Bill Cole. I hear all the concerns about traffic, parking, etc. And I think that would be a huge thing if we had 20 events with the setup, the takedown, and all that. But that isn't really what I wanted to ask or hear about. It has more to do with what is really the purpose for the whole proposal, dollar-wise. Okay, I think that we hear the 100 has to be 20 now. I understand that provision of the law. We understand it in simulcasting license, you have to have the other permit. Right now, I think simulcasting is available in the state casinos, Plainville maybe, and if I'm not mistaken, only any other entity that has racing in place by sometime next year. Is that correct? So who is going to be able to do simulcast? And is that not where all the money really is? There's no admission to this thing. Almost all the money comes from the betting online, as you say. Would it even be much of a financial loss to the whole enterprise if there's 20 events and almost nobody came? You still have the event going on, you meet the law, you've got the simulcasting license, that's where almost all the money comes from. And is that not why a lot of lobbying has gone into changing the law and writing it the way it's just been written? Thank you very much.
So thank you for your question, Mr. Paul. You're correct. The horse breeding and racing and training does not have, it's a loss leader. The people that have a horse farm do so because it is a passion. They don't do it because they're looking to make a buck. And so what the facility does through the Racehorse Development Fund is it allows for the distribution of purses, which allows those horse farms all across the Commonwealth and in Hardwick, the kind of things that Dr. Dixon was talking about. It enables them to generate revenue that sustains those horse farms. The simulcasting itself is where the dollars are generated, and it is electronic. There are simulcasting is largely done through the entity that does the racing because of federal and state law, but other people who can offer it and they still get a piece that goes through to the community are the casinos, and anyone who's licensed under 128A. As of right now, as far as I know, the only live race meet license application is this one. So the answer is, if there was somebody else, yeah, they could be part of the conversation as well. But this is us, and you're right. The money is generated in one place, and it is spent in the other. I hope that answers your question.
Marcus Hayden at Barre Road, Salt Lake, right there. There you go, Salt Lake, right there. We're on Simpson and Barre, so basically sandwiched between the properties there. So I think what I'm hearing from most people is integrity issues. Like we're concerned the selectmen get voted up. This, Sturbridge, the people have to vote up. So we really hope that the selectmen take the claps, the applause for all of these negative responses seriously. With that, I think a way to curb that would be something like a local gaming commission, racing commission, or you'd have to work with some of the people here to stay within the confines of what you're talking about. 20 race days a year. Would that be something you would be willing to entertain?
So the answer to your last question is yes. The group would be open to having some kind of local group of people, which is something that we haven't proposed a host community agreement as yet, but at some point we would. Let me just correct you on one thing. In Sturbridge, the selectmen decided the location and they voted to have that location. It was the community that had to vote on the zoning because of the commercial zoning of the site. So the community of Sturbridge did not vote on the track or the license. Their vote was on whether or not to allow the commercial zoning for the commercial development of a very large commercial development, and that's what they voted against. They didn't vote against the track. In fact, the selectmen voted in favor of putting the track at Sturbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Hayden. All right. Ms. Barnes, you're going to be the second to last, and then Mr. Wojcik is going to be the last for this evening because we're going to wrap it up. And folks need to do some procedural things. Again, it's going to be here tomorrow night at 6:30, same location, so don't disrupt the cheers and everything. Mrs. Barnes, and then Mr. Wojcik will be the last one.
I would like an explanation of the alcohol that's consumed at these events. I have concerns about people getting on the road after imbibing from 1 to 6 p.m. And
get closer to the microphone or pull it down.
I have concerns about people getting on the road after imbibing of alcohol from 1 to 6 p.m. The roads are curvy and the Old Furnace Hill, it seems like a recipe does that. Do you have to have alcohol there?
So we would be limited to whatever it is the selectmen would give us. We haven't made it that far along in our planning. We would likely apply for a 1-day license to the board, and it would be subject to whatever restrictions the board places on it, if they allow it at all. So the answer is we would probably look to serve something as part of the amenities that are offered, but that's a separate license and it's issued on a case-by-case basis, and we'd have to go to the board and apply for it and explain what we would do and how we would do that. Before I stop as well, I just want to introduce the woman to my right is Mary, who, if you've emailed or sent something in, is the person who is communicating with folks. Say hello to her, and if you've got a comment, feel free to email and let us know.
Good evening. So a couple of questions. One of them being that obviously the horses, as you said, are the pathway to the money. So the horses you need to be able to get the money that the state has to be able to allow you to gamble. So when and if the
horse racing dries up, they don't have enough people to attend, and the money dries up to the state, then what happens to the property? Do you have another part to your question? Oh, that's it. Okay.
So the racehorse development fund does not come from racing. So those dollars are set aside by the state from a couple of different sources. Those dollars become purse money, which supplies and pays for the purses for the meets. Whether people attend, there was a gentleman who raised a question, I think it was Mr. Cole, about what if nobody attends? A lot of these races, you'd be surprised they'd have a very small audience because the people who are attending are the people who are associated with those horses. People who wish to wager on those horses are doing so on their phone because they get points, because they are part of some other piece of that. But the dollars that are generated for the Racehorse Development Fund, which generate the purses, which go back to the breeding into the horse farmers, comes from the Racehorse Development Fund. It doesn't come from the races itself.
So the state doesn't have any money to give to the horse breeder to raise the horses.
They do. It doesn't come from racing. So
that you're right. So how do you continue to breed? And once that possible is gone, what happens to the program, the breeding program?
Thank you.
Once that's consumed.
It's an evergreen fund, but the answer, if the state has no money to do anything, then they won't do it. And we'll have to figure out a way to go through that. I don't foresee that as an issue in this situation.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to pass the meeting back off to Chairwoman Quinn. We did have a hard stop for 8 o'clock. I'm sorry, but she'll explain next steps.
So, thank you for all of your comments and questions. Anything that hasn't been answered, and council has taken down some notes. We have some notes and we'll try to come prepared tomorrow night. So procedurally, this is a public hearing. We are not closing the hearing. We are going to recess the hearing until tomorrow night, and we'll all sit here again and answer questions. And as an aside, there's a lot of concern. I'll just speak to the concern. The Board of Selectmen does not have to vote on this tomorrow night. Okay. Obviously, we want to keep the process moving along, whatever that process is. But if the board doesn't feel comfortable with the information we have, we don't have to vote on it tomorrow night. Doesn't mean we won't, but we don't have to. So just keep that in mind. Tomorrow night we're going to recess the public hearing until tomorrow night, same time, 6:30. If you have questions in the meantime that you'd like an answer to, and the folks, the Great Meadowbrook proponents will be here tomorrow night to answer questions as well. Please send your questions to Nicole. So with that being said, I'll entertain a motion to recess the public hearing until tomorrow night at 6:30.
I'll make a motion to recess the public hearing until tomorrow night at 6:30 at the same location, Hardwick Elementary School.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?